Hey guys, I'm back with another vlog. Sorry this one took so long, but this is from our trip up to Auburn, where we visited Winston Smith Books, so let's go on in and see what they had in store. Will you just look at all those books? Here's the fantasy and science fiction section. They had a pretty decent selection here. Pretty big shelves, as you can see. There was another one on the other side that I didn't get. But here they had mostly mass-market paperbacks, lots of old stuff, you know, small paperbacks, cheap things. And this main shelf here was bigger paperbacks, hardcovers, and that kind of stuff. I believe they had some first editions, but I don't remember. Some of these look like they could be, though. This was the first book that caught my eye, Agvar by Brust. I bought some of his collections in a previous vlog that I showed. This was some kind of strange, mystical thing about immortality, a guy who's over a century old. The main thing that caught my eye on this one is basically just that awesome cover art. As you can see, it's got a sort of engraving, pen and ink sort of thing. I think that's awesome. Here is Alas Babylon by Pat Frank, a really famous post-apocalyptic novel from the 50s. I haven't read this, but I think I own a copy of it already, so I didn't buy it this time. It's supposed to be really, really dark and depressing for the time, so I'm interested to see what it's like. Up here we have this really, really nice hardcover edition of Clive Barker's Weave World. This was his second novel, I believe, his first fantasy novel. And I already own a copy of it, of this exact first edition, otherwise I would have bought it, but it's just really, really nice, so I just have to show it off. This was pretty interesting. Some old Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff. Here's The Gods of Mars. This is a more recent reprint. Cool cover art there. Never read any of these, but I'd like to at some point. And here's an old Penguin edition of the first Tarzan novel, Tarzan of the Apes. I did read this a long time ago, and to be honest, I didn't really think it was that great, kind of old and dated, but it was interesting. But what really caught my eye were these old hardcovers, The Mastermind of Mars and The Outlaw of Torn. These all had kind of interesting layouts, you know, that old 1900s look to them. Now here's something I thought was really, really interesting, Chronicles of the Lensmen Volume 1 and 2 by E. Doc Smith. These are a series of very famous pulp paperback novels that were a influence on the Green Lantern comics. So I've always wanted to read them. I've got an old paperback somewhere, but I haven't read it yet. I would have bought these because, as you can see, they're really, really nice, really well put together, but they were going for a pretty steep price, so I didn't go for it this time. Really cool, though. And here's just a bunch of shots I got of the back of the store. This is where they had the majority of their fiction, and they were all in these really cool, sort of tightly cloistered shelves that were all sort of shoved into the back. Had this kind of rustic feeling to it. It was nice, you know, sort of being surrounded by books on all sides. So, pretty cool. And as you can see, there's some Library of America stuff there. They had all kinds of stuff here. I would have taken the time to look through every single section, but we didn't really have the time, unfortunately. And in the back here, it was mostly biographies and autobiographies, I think some regular nonfiction, but mostly biographies from what I could tell, and some religious fiction there, as you can see. I only had the time to look through one section here in the back, but this was the first thing that caught my eye, The Robber Bride by Margaret Atwood. Of course, she's a very, very famous writer, wrote The Handmaid's Tale and everything like that. I believe this is based off of an old Grimm fairy tale, which is really cool, so dunno, might be worth checking out at some point. Now this was a really, really interesting find, The Long Ships by Franz G. Bengtson, probably mispronouncing that. It's a historical adventure novel from the 50s, I believe, about Vikings and things like that. I only found out about it recently, but what was really frustrating about this was that I had suggested this for the library only a day before we went out here, and then I found this book, so whatever, that happens sometimes. Here was something interesting that I'd never heard of before, Live Blog by Megan Boyle. It's this huge chunker of a book that's basically a blog of this person's life. I think it was published online originally. I don't know, it was really, really weird and interesting. I didn't buy it, but I might check it out at some point. I like weird, sort of techno novels like that, I guess you'd call them. I don't know. Here's the first book that I decided to buy. This is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. Really, really famous science fiction writer. I've always been meaning to read more of her stuff, and I've just never gotten around to it. I have a copy of Bloodchild and a few other books, so why not? One more to add to the pile for my eventual read. Down here, they had a bunch of stuff by Alexandre Dumas, of course, so I had to show it off, since I just finished Count of Monte Cristo and I loved it. And in fact, you can see the Penguin edition that I read there. Up here, they had a bunch of books in the Sharpe series by Bernard Cornwell. It's a series I've always been meaning to read, and here's the first book, Sharpe's Rifles, so I decided to buy it. Why not? Now here was something really interesting. Sacred Games by Vikram Chandra. I mentioned this in my bookshelf tour video, but this is a huge, like, 900-page epic all about the underworld, the crime underworld in Mumbai. It sounds really Dickensian and sprawling and interesting, so I grabbed it. Why not? There were even more books upstairs, including the horror section, so of course I had to get this cool shot from on top of the loft. Once again, just look at all those books. And here's the horror section. Admittedly, it wasn't much, the typical stuff you'd expect to see, you know, Stephen King, Dean Koontz, Anne Rice, that kind of stuff. But they had a few interesting things, which I'll show here in a second. Some Brian Lumley hardcovers and stuff, as you can see there. A lot of John Saul, obviously. This was the first thing that caught my eye, California Gothic by Dennis Etchison. I showed this in my bookshelf tour video, but this is part of the Dell Abyss horror line of paperbacks that were published in the 90s. I've been collecting these, and I'd never even heard of this one. It never showed up in any of the lists I looked up, so of course I grabbed it. Okay, now, I'm kicking myself for not buying these two. They're signed first editions of some Clive Barker books, Abarat and Sacrament. I don't even own a copy of Abarat, and I own a copy of Sacrament, but it's a paperback. And it's signed. It's a signed first edition. Why didn't I buy this? Why didn't I buy both? What the fuck is wrong with me? Here was one I almost bought, but I didn't because I wasn't sure if I owned a copy of it already. This is Son of the Endless Night by John Ferris. It's like a horror novel about... It's sort of a crime thriller, like a courtroom drama about, like, demonic possession and stuff like that. I did find out later that I do own a paperback copy of it, so I'm glad I didn't buy it, but still, it's pretty interesting. And here was something I hadn't seen before. It's a hardcover edition of City Infernal by Edward Lee. I think this was put out by Cemetery Dance. I didn't even know this existed. I only was familiar with it through the Leisure paperback, which I already own a copy of, so I didn't buy this, but still, really cool. And then, to cap off the day, we just went to a local fish and chips restaurant that was right across the street, and we had a really good time. I had some calamari strips and some fish, as you can see here, along with some chips and some cocktail sauce and some tartar sauce. It was a lovely meal, a very nice, rustic sort of deal, and yeah, we had a really good time. I'm glad we went.